Week 8 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I look to start this week. The first guy, Graham Gano of the New York Giants. Graham Gano, it's been a solid season here for him, and obviously this Giant team, they're winning a lot of close ball games by a field goal or less, it seems like, over the last few weeks here. And Graham Gano has been a good part of it. Week 5 at Green Bay, 10 fantasy points. Week 6 versus Baltimore, 6 fantasy points. And Week 7 at the Jaguars, 11. So this week here, a good matchup once again at Seattle. A ball game where both these teams, I think, are pretty similar in the way they move the ball and get a lot of field goal attempts. Jason Myers is on this list as well. I'll talk about him next. But anyway, Graham Gano, he's got 4 double-digit fantasy games this season here at the kicking position. I wouldn't be surprised once again he does it this week here in Week 8. Another double-digit ball game. And I like him as a start this week. Next up is Jason Myers of the aforementioned Seattle Seahawks. So Jason Myers, he's been a solid kicker this season. I know the last few years we haven't seen much out of him in fantasy football, but now 5 games in a row with double-digit fantasy points here for Jason Myers. Week 4 at Detroit, 14. Week 5 in New Orleans, 10. Week 6 versus Arizona, 13. And Week 7 at the Chargers, 16. So he's putting up monster points. He's top 5 in fantasy points at the kicker position. And he's surprisingly, he's still available right now in 42% of fantasy leagues. So this Giant team gives up the 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. This is going to be a close ball game. And once again, I think Myers could get that double-digit game, at least 8 points as his floor in this one. So I definitely have him as a start this week. The next kicker, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So Tyler Bass, a lot of people got him off the waiver wire after his bye week passed in Week 7. And I was one of those guys to get him in a couple leagues after people dropped him. I know it's hard to keep 2 kickers on a roster, but a guy as good as Bass, you want him on the roster with the team he's on. Even though I know the last few weeks before the bye week in Week 7, his numbers dropped off a little. Week 4, Baltimore, 11. Week 5 versus Pittsburgh, 8. And Week 6 at Kansas City, 6. And right here, Week 8, Sunday Night Football, good matchup versus the Packers. 10th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And right here, this Bill team coming off a bye, I think their offense is going to get ready to go. And they wanted Josh Allen, he wants to stick it, I think, to Aaron Rodgers in this one and really be the ball game. Passing of the torch, where this Bill team will get in position a lot in this game for scoring opportunities. So right now, Tyler Bass, I think he has a good ball game, and he's a kicker I would start this week. The next guy, Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Daniel Carlson, a top kicker once again this season as well in fantasy points. And just like Myers and Gano on the season here for Carlson, 5 ball games with double-digit fantasy points. So the last few weeks here for him, Week 4 versus Denver, he had 14. Week 5 at Kansas City, 16. Week 7 versus Houston, 10. And now Week 8 here, a great matchup at the Saints. Indoor game, obviously, in New Orleans. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to kickers, and their defense really don't stop anyone. Raider offense this season here. It's been a drive it down a lot, but settle for field goals. But I think in this one, the points won't be that crazy here for Carlson, but anywhere from 8 to 12 fantasy points is definitely a possibility. And he's a guy you obviously start each and every week. And the 5th and final kicker I look to start this week, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. So this Bengal offense has been on a tear over the last few weeks here. I know they took a big blow now, losing Jamar Chase for 4 to 6 weeks with a hip injury. So this might be more points for Evan McPherson, where they get down in the red zone and can't finish drives off with the touchdown with their number 1 target out of action here. So the last few games here for McPherson, Week 5 at Baltimore, 6. Week 6 at New Orleans, 8. And Week 7 in a matchup I thought he would do great versus Atlanta. Only 5 fantasy points because they had 35 in that one and all extra points for McPherson. But this week here on Monday Night Football, it's a division game at the Dog Pound in Cleveland. A tight ball game I still think it'll be. These division games in that division usually are all close. But right here, I think McPherson has one of his better games in this season. I know he's only got 3 double-digit fantasy games here. I wouldn't be surprised if he has his 4th one this week. So that's a few kickers I look to start here for Week 8 of the fantasy football season.